Hannah, if you do want to make me a co-host, then I can help also just like admit people if you're talking and stuff like that.
Do you know how to make co-host and not just host?
I feel like it's usually in participants. If you click more, is there like a make co-host next to your name? Or does it just say make host?
Just says make host.
Then maybe you can't.
Seems like some people are getting in without the waiting room, so.
Okay, good.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. We're hoping to get started in just a few minutes. We're waiting on our speakers to join, but thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Yes.
So Ryan should be calling in. Oh, he's right there.
Hey everyone.
Perfect. All right, we'll get started in just a minute. I think everyone's out of the waiting room. All right. So hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to the webinar tonight. I'm super excited to get started. My name is Hannah Matthews and I'm the Director of Education for the Chapel Hill Alt Protein Project. The Alt Protein Project is a student initiative supported by the Good Food Institute, which is a global nonprofit working to accelerate the development of plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-derived alternatives to conventional meat, eggs, and dairy. At the Chapel Hill Alt Protein Project, we strive to create a vibrant and robust community for alternative protein research and innovation at UNC Chapel Hill.
And hi, my name is Sarah Crockett. I am the president of the Net Impact Club at the UNC Keenan Flagler Business School. Net Impact is a global organization of emerging business leaders that are committed to using the power of business to create a better world. So our chapter of Net Impact has a mission specifically to provide our students with education, opportunity, and inspiration to drive social, financial, and environmental change. So tonight we will be learning from co-founders Marillis Holm and Ryan Bethencourt about sustainable food ventures and their goal to support founders developing sustainable and alternative protein food products. So first, I will introduce co-founder Marillis Holm. Marillis is the former head of food science of Finless Foods, the pioneering cell-based seafood startup, and she is also the co-founder of Non-Food. Marillis has experience from working with some of the top global food corporations, and she also has experience doing research as a food and sensory scientist. At Sustainable Food Ventures, Marillis is leading scientific diligence and manages day-to-day operations.
Next, I would like to introduce co-founder Ryan Bethencourt. Ryan is the CEO of Wild Earth, the leading D2C healthy plant-based pet food company in the US, and he also co-founded and was the program director and venture partner at IndieBio, where the companies he funded and supported helped to grow the portfolio's market cap to $3.2 billion. Over the past 6 years, Ryan has invested in over 120 early-stage food and biotech startups. At Sustainable Food Ventures, Ryan is the managing partner, sourcing deal flow and making investment decisions. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Throughout the webinar, if you guys have questions for Marillis or Ryan, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and the Chapel Hill Alt Protein Project's co-founders, Sophia and Deeksha, will ask them during the Q&A. Or if you are comfortable, you can unmute yourself and ask them over the speaker during the Q&A. Now I'd like to hand it over to Marillis and Ryan to present about Sustainable Food Ventures.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Sarah, for introducing us, and thank you, Sophia, for moderating the upcoming Q&A. So me and Ryan, we decided we'll give a quick overview about Sustainable Food Ventures, what do we do, and then we would actually love to have as much questions as we can take in the next hour. So we decided on this format. So I can go ahead and start about introducing the fund. So we are a very new fund, and we started literally a month ago. So in early October is when we launched. And as Hannah already mentioned, we're investing in early stage companies, specifically in the alt protein space, focusing on companies that are either plant-based, cell-based, or recombinant. And we like to invest in companies that are directly substituting animals in the supply chain. So this is what we are vouching for as a fund and as individuals. And so far we've made 4+ upcoming 2 investments, and we can talk a bit about those. They're in the plant-based and cell-based space. And Ryan, do you want to add anything to what we're currently doing?
Yeah, part of our mission is really to accelerate the future of food movement and companies, entrepreneurship outside of Silicon Valley and some of the more classical ecosystems. Big area of focus for us is the South and particularly Research Triangle Park. As we've kind of relocated here with that mission. So we actually have been able to fund our first company, which is Gelatech in RTP, which is really exciting. So Stephanie, actually, I would highly recommend her as a speaker next. And so she's based in Raleigh. She actually moved from the Bay Area. And so she's based here, and her co-founder is actually based in I always mispronounce this, Wageningen, which is over in the Netherlands. So they're doing some really interesting stuff, and it's a cell-based company. We think that it is the first cell-based company in North Carolina. So I was just double checking in my mind. So we're really excited about that. And so separately, I still run Wild Earth. I'm still the CEO of a commercial stage company. We were across continental US. We're now international. We're actually one of the top selling dog food companies in India, interesting enough. And then I continue to do some work with some additional companies where I advise and support some of the teams there. But I mean, I think that's kind of an overview of Sustainable Food Ventures. Maybe just sometimes I give like these whole long talks. Marillis and I both give really long talks, and I can do that as well. But to answer the question, why Sustainable Food Ventures? What's the opportunity from a business perspective in front of us? We're really looking at the $2 trillion market opportunity in front of us, which is basically all animal-derived protein, which is not, has multiple issues around it, right? From health to sustainability to, for those that are driven by animal issues, like myself and like Marillis, it has some ethical issues around factory farming as well. And so we think that the opportunity to disrupt the entire supply chain is absolutely massive. Just to give you an idea of the potential impact. So all plant-based meats account for maybe 1% of that market, right? So the opportunity, Beyond Meat, even though it's as huge as it is and the most successful IPO we've seen in the last 20 years, I've lost track of where they are, whether they're above a $10 billion market cap or below it. So some, yo-yos back and forth, but like it's a big company, a multi-billion-dollar company. That's still tiny compared to where we're going. And so, the opportunity, not just in plant-based meats, cell-based meats, recombinant foods, the dairy market, very similar, enormous potential when we're looking at alternative proteins. So the dairy market is probably the most advanced. It accounts for so the plant-based portion of the dairy market is about 15% currently. I know it feels like we have all the plant-based milks you could ever imagine, the oats, the soys, the coconuts. That's only 15% of the current market, growing incredibly quickly. Even the CEO of Dannon predicts that within the next couple of years, we're going to see that increase to 50% of the total dairy market, right? So, the economic opportunities outside of the sustainable aspects, outside of the health aspects, outside of the animal issues, the economic opportunity is vast in front of us. And so Marillis and I, and we're co-founders at Sustainable Food Ventures, decided that we really wanted to double down, support both the local ecosystem here, and also aggressively go after the opportunity, which we think is good for the planet, good for people, and good for the animals as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Something that I want to add is that the first investments that we've made, and that I'm really proud about, is that we have half of the CEOs are male and half of the CEOs are female, or identify themselves as that, right? And two of them are in the East Coast, and one is in Raleigh that Ryan mentioned, and two are at the West Coast, but two are actually outside of the US. And one of them is Nigeria's first plant-based meat company called Veggie Victory, which we think is a very interesting ecosystem. And if a country like this can start their journey to increasing meat consumption, right, as developing countries are, and have already a great alternative on the market ready, I think this is going to have a huge positive impact on the future health, but also on the planet and on the animals. So that's something where I am personally really excited about.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited. As Marillis highlighted that, if we look at Nigeria, just Nigeria as a potential market, today, Nigeria has 200 million people. In the next 30 years, Nigeria will be a country of 400 million people. That's more than the US, right? So the market opportunity is definitely there. It has its issues, right? It has lots of operational issues in terms of getting business done there. And I'm sure Hakeem and his team, who actually founded Veggie Victory, would be happy to come and talk about some of the issues operating in emerging economies. But the sheer market opportunity there is vast, and so we really want to be there before some of the damage is done, right? So if you look at currently Nigeria, even though you ask your average Nigerian, they're proudly they eat meat, but when you look into it, it's nothing like the consumption we see here in the US. Right? It really is an extra to the meal. And so, it's a lighter consumption of meat. And so we think that there is a way to intervene and capture the market opportunity by providing high quality, great protein into that marketplace in formats that people like, right? So it's not a hamburger and sausage, depending on where you are, whether you're in Lagos or you're in Manila in the Philippines, the form factors are going to be different. And so, and the way that things are done are going to be very different.
Yeah,
we can definitely talk about that too.
Yeah, just to add on that, as an example, the Veggie Victory is making plant-based chunks. So they're used to eating meat as chunks, and they don't necessarily always it could be chunks of lamb or chunks of pork, or just different chunks. And then in Philippines, interestingly, one of the most consumed meat products that has meat in it is hot dog. So it's really interesting in terms of local cultures. We're also learning together with the founders what is on their everyday meal in terms of form factor, but also what are the cultural flavor preferences, because that's very different between cultures as well.
And for us, we do this for the people as well, right? So when you look at the Philippines as an example, unfortunately, the Philippines is really inspired. The Filipino cuisine is very inspired by cuisine in the US. And so when we look at it, there's a lot of very fatty foods, fried foods, hot dogs are everywhere. Sugar is everywhere. And so, they have a very similar problem with obesity, diabetes, and a bunch of other aligned health issues. And so, we think that there's a better path to getting better products to these emerging economies, and swapping out these things. Like, I've spent some time in Manila and the Philippines particularly, and it's just like very unhealthy foods that are fine when you're younger, but if you consume them, lots of it, it puts you in a very bad place and really can negatively affect your health. Obviously increasing diabetes and obesity. So I think that there is, there's multiple missions within this, which is better for people and, better for the planet as well. I think maybe, one thing to do is we can definitely dive down in what does it take to go from an idea to raising some money to executing to building something new and interesting. We can definitely go in those directions. And we can speak to it from all aspects. Our mission is really to help and support the local community, right? Obviously, particularly within RTP and across North Carolina, we want to be just as much a resource as an investor. We cut relatively small checks. Our check sizes are between 50 to 100K to help companies get off the ground. Literally, that first check you need to get anything done. But outside of that, we actually want to be very much a resource. So when you have questions, when you want to talk about building companies, both Marillis and I have experience on the entrepreneurship side as well as the investor side. And if you want to build something, I've probably seen someone trying to build it. And so I can probably guide you in the right direction. If you're like, Pat, left, right, which way should I go? I can go, look, go right, don't go left, because left, there's a bunch of like bankrupt companies to the left, and right is interesting. So
yeah, and in addition to that, my background is in food science. So obviously we're investing in the future of food, so that technical help, and I've specialized in sensory and flavor science. So I was lucky enough to be born as a super taster. So it's a blessing, but sometimes it's a curse at the same time. So I have a palate that can very fast tell you what the flavor notes are, but I've trained myself to really give you analytical feedback. So I can be the mouth robot, let's just put it like that, to help you with the product development side.
Yeah, but she can basically help you go from like something that doesn't taste great to something actually that's edible and tastes good, right? Like that journey is very important, right? So mouth, feel, look, taste, smell, all these things are incredibly important.
Yeah. So how about we open, Ryan, is there anything you want to add, or we can?
No. I love going straight to the questions. And by the way, you can ask anything, because that's one of the things that I think I find the most enjoyable. And I think that people who are thinking about, their careers, building something, joining a company, just very open, right? Whichever direction you want to go, we can talk about it. Currently, Wild Earth, we have 22 employees. So I'm heavily involved with helping people on their personal career development as well. And so we can talk about that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan and Marillis, for your presentation. I learned a lot, and I'm super excited to see where you guys go. Me and Sophia are going to moderate the Q&A session, so you guys can feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or put it in the chat, and we'll read them out to Ryan and Marillis.
I will also add for business school students, we're very used to raising our hands. I don't know if you guys do that in your experience. So I think Megan has her hand raised. So maybe if you guys could just open that participant view and make sure we're checking on that too. So Megan, feel free to ask your question.
I do. I have my little blue hand up. So my question is, what is your criteria for choosing to get involved with these companies? Just because I feel like it is a huge space. There's a lot of things happening, and you're picking up places all over the world. So how do you decide?
Marillis, you want to go first?
Sure. So I can talk a bit about how the process works, or has been working so far. It's very much a new thing that we're implementing, but Ryan has deep experience already with IndieBio. So what we are currently doing is where the process works like that companies either find us through our webpage or through introductions or are already in our network. And they apply, and then I have the first introductory call with them, kind of like gather the information from their deck and from the conversation we had. And then me and Ryan take the information and kind of nerd out on it on the weekends or in the evenings, and then make a decision from there. But the first 6 investments that we did, 5 of them we actually have been talking to the founders before we invested. So before having the fund up and running, the 5 out of the 6 were actually some people that Ryan had either angel invested into or co-built, and he can talk more about what a co-build is. And then now the next 5 to 10 that we are aiming to do in December, the process is going to be similar, but probably I'd love to add a bit more due diligence in the sense of like kind of asking a few references or recommendations from people who have previously worked with the team or with the CEO to kind of like just to know them a bit more. Because in this early stage, what really matters is the idea itself. Like, does it have potential to be venture invested? And some companies, like for example, non-food, turned out to take some venture money, but then turned into a lifestyle business. So some companies have the potential of really becoming venture fundable, and it's an art to deciding which ones. But the other component that is super important in this early stage is the team itself. How well they work, have they worked together, are they complementary, and of course, you know, how they are building and growing, and what's their vision for the future. So Ryan, do you want to speak a bit to the...
Yeah, I can speak more to the philosophy of building. And so just as a side note added on to that, one of the things we're trying to do is we're actively trying to build a local ecosystem. And so, you know, like it looks like in the next batch of companies that we fund, we might actually bring a company that's slightly outside of the triangle. It's in the south, but outside of the triangle here. And it would be a cell-based company, which would be really exciting, cell-based meat company. So, you know, we're actively trying to create a future food ecosystem alongside a lot of the incredible work that all of you are doing right now. We want to start bringing the companies that can start raising the money and have more and more founders that can be examples and collaborators and speakers and all that other sort of stuff. So, you know, appreciate the work that you're all doing here. So I often get asked, like, how do you choose a company? Like, how do you find a company? How do you choose a company? Like, and my answer is a very strange mix of philosophy and like pragmatic advice. So when you're looking to understand a landscape, right? So a technological landscape, because this is really what I view it. So even though plant-based food is food, I view it as a technology. I actually view food as a technology, right? And I'll give you an example of that. So a veggie burger, right? Beyond Meat did not invent the veggie burger, right? It was, you know, many of you remember in those natural food stores, the really gross veggie burgers, right? The ones that had like corn and some black beans. Some of them tasted good. Some of them really were not tasty, but you ate it because it was, you know, good for the planet, maybe good for you, right? And then Beyond Meat really came up with, Ethan Brown came up with this idea of like, hey, why don't we make something that tastes like a burger instead of, you know, instead of just a veggie burger? Let's come up with it. Actually, his first attempt was chicken strips. I don't know if anyone remembers the chicken strips that Beyond Meat first came out with. They were like, okay. They were like kind of rubbery. You closed your eyes and really thought about it. It was almost like chicken, right? Like you had to think about it a little bit, but it was almost like chicken. Beyond Meat's first product did not succeed, right? What ended up happening was Ethan and his team, and I've talked to him about it, Ethan and his team really were like, hey, we need something very like different. And so he was really focused on making something that was as close to meat so you could have a real replacement, but made out of plants. And his focus was really around sustainability and health, right? And so he was like, if we do that, we reduce the consumption of meat, and it's better for the environment, better for the planet, and it should be better for people too. And so that was, you know, really transformational. He did a bunch of different things that really changed the landscape. Even though there were already veggie burgers, he created a new technology that was primarily structural and flavor technology in plant-based that led to a new product. Now, what's even more interesting is then Pat Brown, the two Browns, so Pat Brown, who founded Impossible Foods, he was like, well, actually, you know, the flavoring component that's really missing is heme. The thing that gives it the blood-like taste within the burger. And he was a professor of biochemistry at Stanford University. And so he was like, well, why don't we just add it? And so, you know, it's a GMO product, right? He actually brews it in yeast. and it's actually it's a soy heme group, but it's engineered into yeast. It looks like blood, even though it's from plants. Kind of interesting. And he puts it into the burger. And if you've had an Impossible burger, it tastes a lot like meat. Like, I've actually had to ask when I've had an Impossible, are you sure you didn't give me a real burger? Right? Because it's that real. And so these are technological landscapes, right? And the reason I'm going into this from a philosophical perspective is that there are local maxima, which are like a veggie burger, right? And then if you look at a landscape, it's almost like looking at a landscape of multiple mountains. Each mountain is a different height. And so you may be able to get to a certain level with a certain technology, but then you'll require other technologies in other mountains to get to different places. So cell-based meat, right? When a cell-based meat hamburger from Memphis Meats comes out, which I was the first investor in Memphis Meats through IndieBio, helped Uma build his company. For those that are not familiar, this is brewing meat, myoblasts, in a bioreactor, and then turning that into actual meat, real meat, but slaughter-free, right? Much more sustainable. Metrics are somewhere between 90 to 95% more sustainable, depending on what you're looking at, whether it's water usage, land usage, this type of thing. And that's an entirely different technology, and it will have an entirely different technological cycle. And so when we look at where to invest, we look at not just the technological aspects, but then also some of the local aspects. So I have a belief, and we have a belief, that we will have national champions, right? And what I mean by that is that people that understand their ecosystems, like Veggie Victory, right? A plant-based meat company in Nigeria, if you were to release a veggie burger or a burger, it wouldn't work, right? Because they don't eat burgers in Nigeria. They do eat burgers, but that's not their main staple fare, right? It's chunks. And so they have chunks with their meals, with sauces, with marinades, with rice, with noodles, and so it's different cuisine. And so he's creating a product that's tailored to that local market. And so now you have technology, now you have location-specific preferences, and then the third question is, okay, well, what about the team? Who is actually going to build that company? And it's really important that you have someone that is willing to learn the business, right? I know for the business students here, you don't have you don't have to have been working for years and years to actually build a company. You just need to start building a company and be willing to learn. And so sometimes that's an entrepreneur who has a business background or philosophy background or politics background or science background. And then you need your scientist, whether it's a food scientist or a food technologist or a PhD molecular biologist. You'll need someone that's credible in both areas. So business lead, science lead. Once you have two credible people, and they can be young, they can be old, they can be, doesn't matter, right? Whatever shape or form that person is in doesn't really matter as long as they're willing to lead on the business and on the science. And so those are the components of what you need. And then when we're looking particularly at food, and just to give everyone a background, I've also invested in lots of biotech companies. So I've helped build and fund gene therapy companies, cancer companies, all of that sort of stuff at IndieBio. Now I spend most of my time in the food space, but I'm a biotech entrepreneur and business person by background. Those are the types of skill sets that we would take forward. And then basically you need to look at where are the white spaces, right? Where are the white spaces where you can build a sizable business, where there's a significant total addressable market, a TAM. And then you look for those white spaces, right? And those white spaces are like, as an example, I know you had biomilk, right? Speak recently. So basically you have, what's the plant-based technology for milk? Oh, there's a bunch, right? There's oat milk, there's soy, there's all this other sort of stuff. That's a pretty crowded white space. What's the recombinant opportunity? Actually, there's only really Perfect Day, right? Like casein, there's a couple of other companies, smaller companies, but it's primarily Perfect Day. Then what's the cell-based opportunity for milk? Oh, there's only two companies. There's Biomilk and there's Turtle Tree. And they grow mammary cells. In the case of Biomilk, they grow human mammary cells, human breast cells. In the case of Turtle Tree, they actually grow both human and cow breast cells. It sounds really gross, right? For a lot of people, it's like, wait, we've got a bunch of breast cells making milk. But the thing is, it's like, that's still a technological white space. There's only two companies there, right? Are those two companies going to win a global market, the global milk market? Probably not. So that means there's probably opportunities in other places to use other technologies that are specific to whatever their use case is, like biomilk preemies, so premature babies, right? Like that's a great biomedical application of their milk, right? So like that is maybe a kind of a long way of viewing like how do you build a company. I think Megan, you asked about that, and so like there's a lot that goes into the philosophy of building a company. And then, I mean, we could probably spend a lifetime reading the philosophy of entrepreneurship, right? Like everyone has a philosophy on how you build companies. It is to me, business is philosophy in action, right?
I have a question. Well, first I want to start by saying shout out to Biomilk. I worked for them this summer and they were an awesome company. This kind of ties into the question I have. So, you know, sustainability is of course like kind of ingrained to all these startups. So they're not specifically usually recruiting for sustainability roles because unlike big corporations, they don't need to market their sustainability quite as much. I'm like a dual degree business student, an environmental management student. So when I'm kind of seeking out roles, I don't really have that super technical science background, but also, you know, I'm not particularly interested going into sales. So what kind of recommendations do you have for people who are more specifically interested in that sustainability area?
So here's an example that I'll use that I think is a good example. So are you familiar with Clara Foods? You know Clara Foods? So they brew egg whites. So Arturo, he actually was a politics grad. He was a poli-sci grad out of Harvard, right? He had no clue about science, like really did not. And it got to the point where he and his co-founder, they were totally disconnected. It was just like his co-founder was working in the lab. He was trying to raise money. We sat them together. And so he sat in the lab with his co-founder as his co-founder was working. We started asking him questions. Eventually, Arturo became proficient enough that he was able to actually speak the language of science. And so, you know, you have some fundamentals, especially with your environmental science background. Like you have some fundamentals, and so you can do a business role where you blend some of the science and some of the business. I would stay less focused, just from a career perspective, less focused on pure sustainability and much more on like, you know, I came up through sales. So I even worked for, you know, big pharma companies like Pfizer. I would sell door to door, knocking on doors and selling to doctors. Back when that happened more, it doesn't happen as much for various different reasons. It's rough. Honestly, it's very rough because you have a quota you have to hit. But there are many ways, many paths you can go down. And I would say that you can learn, you're very adaptable, right? Like what your degree is showing is that you can learn, right? You have an ability to learn, you have an interest in the space. There are a ton of roles that are not sales roles, but can still be aligned to business and sustainability, right? Operations, logistics, marketing, right? Like, you know, there's so many other places you can go. Finance, accounting, like it's kind of endless. The bigger the company, the more typically the more opportunities there are to do kind of more niche roles that are kind of weird and interesting. Yeah. Marillis, did you want to share any thoughts on career progression or anything?
Not from the top of my head at the moment. Thank you, Ryan.
Welcome.
Thank
Hello,
you.
my name's Aaron. Thanks for being here.
Hey. Aaron.
So I have a question about insects and insect protein. I know you might not be in your portfolio since you guys are, you know, I guess plant-based,
Yeah.
but you might know about it, I guess. So like,
I do.
How do you see insect protein sort of coming into the human food space? And would it be like in a recombinant type situation? Are we years away from that? Are we, you know, 5, 50, 100? You know, and what companies are doing good and are doing well in that?
Yeah, there was a company. Thanks for the question, Aaron. Yeah, we don't invest. So we don't invest in anything that uses animals. Even though insects, you can argue how sentient they are. They're still animals, and so, you know, our philosophy is we don't use animals, and so insects are included in that bucket. For vegans, I don't use the word vegan. I think I am a vegan still, but like other vegans will argue with me because I'm a little bit more flexible with people. I tend to bias towards kindness first. If people have honey or something, I'm like, hey, that's all right. Like, it's your choice. So like the insect thing is, so taking the insects, like we don't invest in, we still think those are animals, but insect farming is happening. It's happening at scale. It's a much more efficient way of producing protein than factory farming animals. You're factory farming insects instead. It is more efficient from a protein production perspective. There was a French company that just raised, I'm sure you're probably familiar with Aaron, they raised like 400 million euros or something. I can't remember the name of the company. What's that?
It's called Insect, actually.
It's called Insect. There we go. It's called Insect. A lot of people seem to really like insects. I am not a fan of insects. I think if you're in Asia, I think that there is a market for insects in Asia. I think that is, there's some delicacies. If you go to Mexico, there's also some delicacies around insects. But it's just an area that, like, I don't understand why you would do it. Like, why? Like, let's just make cell-based meat. Let's make recombinant stuff. Let's make plant-based, and you've basically got everything covered. They started to use insects for, I don't know if you saw the recent thing. Nestle is now starting to sell insect protein in their dog and their cat food. It's a cost-efficient way of making protein. They think they use larvae, right? They use the larvae, the black, what's it? The black, I've forgotten the name of the insect, the specific insect. Yeah. Marillis, I don't know if you have, like, I wish I could be more excited about insects. There are some people that are super excited about insects. I'm just not. Like, that's just not my jam.
Yeah, like, I can chime in a bit, but just from personal experience, because the CEO of the company, we went to the same school in France, and I actually know another company that was growing like black. I also can't say which fly. There's a specific type of fly, so I'm missing like the middle.
Like black warrior fly or something. Like I need that. Yeah.
I'm gonna say like black queen, but that sounds too cool, so I don't think that's the right one. But so basically, there was another startup after Insect was already like gaining traction back in AgroParisTech in the school France, and they were like actually black soldier flies. So,
yeah, that's it. Black soldier fly.
Yes, those were, yeah. So they were actually like growing in action, and when we had a camera crew over, at the time I was not vegan, so that's like maybe 6 years ago. I actually took one of their flies and I ate it in front of a camera. Worst thing I've ever done in my life so far in terms of a food experience, right? But like I just like, from the consumer perspective, and like I've seen over the last 6 years, like different innovations coming to the market, and the consumers in Europe, that's where I was before the US, they're just like not going for it. So even if there is a market opportunity, like Nestle is innovating and trying with pet at the moment, right? But I don't know, like I agree with Ryan, but in Asia, there might be where there's an inherent culture that is like seeing that as a delicacy. But I'm from Estonia, right? If you come to us with insects, we're just like, how about no? So we probably won't be that nice.
Who's that professor that we talked to? Remember the one that was on the Oxford Ideas Festival that was really excited about insects, but he doesn't think there's any commercial potential? What was the name of the guy?
Charles Spence or the
Charles Spencer? Yeah, Charles Spence. He's a professor. What is he a professor in at Oxford? He's
a professor in sensory science. So, and he's in Oxford, and he's also in sensory and other things.
Aaron, if you're excited about insects, he cooks them in every way you can imagine. He as a delicacy, he actually really likes them. He says he's actually analyzed this, and he's worked for a lot of big food companies. He says just not taking in the West. Like consumers are just not, like, you can try and educate consumers into it, but it's just not taking in the West. So even though he really likes insects, he actually likes the gourmet aspect of the popping experience of you putting a cooked insect in the mouth and popping in your mouth and things. Like, he actually really enjoys those things, but he says it's just not taking in the West. Oh yeah, so insects have been ruined. I missed that particular one. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fear factor. You get a bunch of cockroaches in the basket, right? it's tricky. But Aaron, did that answer your question? Why specifically are you specifically interested in insects?
Yeah, so I guess I'm interested in like innovative food and agriculture topics. And so insects, sure, I understand like the Western, food potential perhaps is limited.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I bought a Exo protein, which is a protein bar made from cricket powder.
Yeah, the Exo
and
bar.
It tastes like any other protein powder you've had. And that really just showed to me like if the cricket is in a powder form, you're not seeing its legs and antenna. And it can then go in whatever you want it to go into.
Yeah. No.
So like that could be a way to do it, right?
Aaron, just to chime in, I've actually talked to the founders of Exo Bar, and that was back in maybe 2017. And they're also an alumni of FoodX, an accelerator that is in New York around food. And they were having some traction, but I haven't heard of them since, right? And that was 3 years back. So they've been on it at least for 5 years, right? So maybe it takes another decade, right? But I agree that trying that bar for myself versus having that fly like direct, those are two very different experiences. So yeah, I could see that having more potential, but I still see a big barrier for the consumer to overcome that insect fear factor, even if they're not visible, right?
And Aaron, I've seen, so I know the founders of Chirps. I don't know if you know Chirps, it's like a tortilla, it's like a cricket tortilla chip. So it's made with it's made with cricket protein powder. And they were actually funded by Mark Cuban as well. And so I know the two founders, they both came out of Harvard as well. And they were just super excited about, I think Laura, she's vegetarian, but she says that she makes exceptions for insects. And so she eats insects. And so she's had, I would say, moderate success. Like if you look closely in many grocery stores, like Chirps are there. I've seen people eating Chirps, but only when like someone brings it and it's like, hey, check this out. This is super gross. It's like cricket chips, but try one. And, like people eat it and they're, oh yeah, it does taste like tortilla chips, and it's kind of like this, like egging people on to like try something new and different. My co-founder ate a whole bag of it. Like Laura brought some in at IndieBio. And then she was like, hey, have some. I was like, yeah, I don't eat insects. But my co-founder was like, I'm hungry, and just ate the whole bag. And he was like, oh, it's just a bunch of tortilla chips. But then I've also seen him eat live ants too, right? So he's cool with insects. So yeah. But Aaron, I would say if you want to do something here in the US or you want to do something in Europe or like one of the developed economies, I don't recommend insects. Like I don't think that's the way to go. I think look at something that you can get behind that you're really excited about, whether it's plant-based, recombinant, or cell-based. If you're like, hey, it has to be real protein, real animal protein, look at cell-based. Like there's probably a ton of possibilities you can do in the cell-based space.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Sumit, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Hi, Ryan. This is Sumit. Well, thanks. This is great. So thanks to you and Marillis for the great presentation, firstly. Myself, I'm a vegan and vegetarian too now. My quick story, I just used to have chicken. So you can call me a chicketarian. I completely quit it early this year, and I feel great. So I follow your posts very carefully. I read them. It really excites me. So I'm interested in knowing, you told us, that you have invested, in biotech and pharma industries as well in the past. So what excited you or what motivated you to get into this food industry? And that too into vegan and vegetarian.
Yeah. So I went vegan before we started building technologies. I honestly thought that I would forever have to be this scientist, entrepreneur, like business guy in the biotech world that was like a hidden vegan, right? Like it's like, oh, when people showed me really, I was in drug development, right? So I would work in human drug development, but I would see some really nasty stuff around like using dogs and using rats and using mice to test drugs. And so I was like, we'd have a day-long meeting to discuss drug development in humans. It's like, oh, what do you want to order, by the way? And I'd be like, is there salad or something? And it's like, oh, but why don't you have a roast beef sandwich over? And it's like, yeah, I don't really eat meat. And they're like, it was always kind of this wait.
I hear you, yeah.
People like protesting them, right? Like, and it's like, yeah, I'm vegan.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I thought those two things would always be separated. I'd just be like this closet vegan in the biotech world, right? But then, I had this opportunity because my true primary passion is to help scientists become entrepreneurs. And, I think science can lift all of humanity up. That is my passion and my interest, and it will go even outside of the food space. And at IndieBio, with my two co-founders, Ron and Arvind, and Sean O'Sullivan, who funded us, there was this weird space where people were like, oh, no one wants any biotech foods. And I was like, why not? And back then, I don't know if you remember, this was 6 or 7 years ago, people were very anti-GMO. People were very like natural, organic, and that is it, right?
Yep.
And I was like, but why not? Like, technology, Homo sapiens are technology using species, right? Like, if you look at the technology in particular, around how technology has lifted humanity up. Like, there's a fantastic book called The Wizard and the Prophet. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, about how new green technologies were used to lift literally hundreds of millions of people out of hunger, right? And this was using agriculture and biotechnologies to lift people up. And so, like, to me, it's like, well, I think we should invest in that space. And so we, at the time, Clara Foods was our first investment. And I still remember what people told me. They basically, so Clara Foods brews egg whites and yeast.
Yeah.
People told me, they basically said, no one will ever eat a GMO egg. Yuck, right? Like, this is disgusting. No one will ever eat it. And I was like, I bet people care more about the environment and the animals than they care about like GMO tech. I can explain GMO tech, right? Like, especially to all the diabetics that are alive today because they're injecting insulin, which is GMO technology. Yep. Right? And I was like, I bet I can explain that. And so that was the bet that we made. And so I wrote an article that went viral about GMOs are okay. And then I started arguing with people, right? I started learning about, like, they were like, oh, you're paid by Monsanto. You're just a shill for the industry. And I was like, no, I really, like, no one's paying me. I wish they would. I'm waiting for my check. It hasn't arrived. I just believe in science, right? Yeah. And I realized there was this unique place where biotechnology and food could meet. And then we started to invest more and more, right? So we started to invest in Memphis Meats and Geltor, which brews collagen in bacteria, Finless Foods, which Marillis was head of food science for. Like, all these companies which really had transformational impacts. I mean, brewing bluefin tuna, I mean, we have a real risk that bluefin tuna will go extinct because we're just eating them, right? Like, I used to give a talk and I used to say, we can't breed bluefin tuna. We can't factory farm bluefin tuna like we can factory farm other animals. And so like, I used to give a talk and I used to say, oh, well, in the Tokyo markets, a bluefin tuna will go for $1 million. And then someone from Tokyo raised their hand and said, $1 million? That's cheap. They go for 2 million now. And I was like, $2 million per bluefin tuna. What does that tell you? That tells you that we're going to have an extinction happening sometime soon, right? Yep. That's what that tells you, right? And to me, it was just horrific. And I was like, oh my God, but we can do something about it now, right? Like, this is the beauty of it. It's like, to me, I view science and technology and entrepreneurship as activism, right? And so, so that was it. And so then, now people view me as like an extremist because I'm out there like, hey, like, we're going to bankrupt all the factory farms. Like, that's my mission, right? And then people are like, this is extreme. You're a bad person. What about all these farmers? I was like, they should get to brewing cell-based meat and growing great crops that make great plant-based meat products, right? Like, why not? That we need those farmers. I love farmers. There's nothing wrong with that. And so that was what originally the reason. It was kind of the right time, right place. I just happened to be vegan and I love biotech. And at the time, it did not feel like it was going to be some sort of hit, right? It really felt like I was doing something weird that a bunch of people told me would never happen. People told me that Memphis Meats was sci-fi, would never exist, was never real. No one would ever invest in it. These were the conversations that I had with people at the time. And so I think this is useful, Sumit, when you're looking at building something, right? Yeah. At the time, people will tell you you're crazy, it's foolish, it'll never work. They might be right, but what if they're wrong? And you never make that thing a reality, right? And so Now it's like when people tell me whatever I'm doing is stupid or foolish or I'm a fool or I'm an idiot, I'm like, yeah, probably. I'm probably an idiot. Like I don't know everything. But if it's backed in science and I can see a path towards it, like I'll follow my own Buddha, right? Like I follow my own path. And I highly recommend that for anyone else, right? Like you have to look within and then you follow what's within you, right? And
Yeah.
come what may.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. I mean, you had a vision. I mean, you know, you had a gut feeling, you just followed your gut feeling. So, I mean, that's great.
And but with plenty of people telling me how foolish I was, right? Like lots and lots of people telling me it wouldn't work, it was foolish and all this other sort of stuff. So it's like what seems foolish today, not so in the future, right? So like give yourself permission to build whatever's in your mind's eye or heart's ambition. Give yourself permission to actually build that thing, whatever that is.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the feedback. That's a great story, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always fun. Like these stories are always fun. At the time, they don't feel quite as fun. It's like, oh my God, I've just made the worst decision in my life.
Well, sometimes you got to take your chances.
Mm-hmm.
You did. That's great. Thanks, Ryan.
Welcome.
Thank you. Aditya, would you like to ask your next question?
Sure thing. Hi, guys. My name is Aditya Padajar. Ryan, if you care, I'm also a vegetarian who comes from the biotech space.
Awesome.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how a company that has a technology for developing some sort of artificial meat or artificial animal product could go from having that technology to identifying a customer base or a market niche, and then adapting that technology to build a product that best suits that market niche.
Yeah. So I'm going to start first with blowing up an assumption that they teach you in business school. You need to have some sort of business plan, and you need to like have this like big thing. Like I actually say blow up business plans, right? Like a pitch deck should be more than enough. And identifying a market, I would recommend you go for the market that exists, right? Like it's $2 trillion market. Go for that. Find a niche within that market and attack that market, right? I mean, there's so many interesting niches to go after. Like, I'll give you one, right? Chicken breast. That's interesting because that's a structured meat problem, right? Or T-bone steak. That's hard, right? Or oysters, scallops. There's just so many. There's so many interesting things to go after. That's just not even addressed. And by the way, don't be put off if one company is already doing it, right? Like it's fine. There's probably going to be like 20 companies in each space. Like one example I'll give you, which I love. So I love looking at, whenever I think about technology looking forward, right? It's hard to see where things are going with technology looking forward. But what I like to do is I like to look back. And so I like to look at previous technological innovation cycles and what happened there, right? So I'm a student of history as well. And so I'll give you one example. So when you look at the total number of car companies, there was a period of time, in the heyday of the car, right? When we had our, we basically shifted from animal technologies, horse and buggy or horses, to cars. There were somewhere between 300 to 400 car companies. That's a huge number of car companies. And so like, don't be limited by like go for an area that you think you can solve a really unique problem in with the technology that you have, and be creative. Scientists, entrepreneurs can create IP. Don't feel that you have to like actually license it from the university. It's like, if you have an idea and it's patentable, that's called IP, intellectual property. And if you think it's based off of several novel insights, even if it's publicly available information, but combined together would be novel, you can patent that. Like I create IP all day long. I love it. I'm like, hey, what if we did this and we added this and we did this other thing? And people are like, yeah, that seems novel. Okay, let's try. And you submit a patent, right? Patent costs, if you file it yourself, it's pretty cheap, but a patent can be 5 to 15K.
All right, thanks a lot.
You're welcome. By the way, did you have an idea that you wanted to build out?
No, so my background is so currently I'm a student in systems engineering, and one of my areas of interest is requirements analysis. So the reason I was asking that question is I was hoping that I could perhaps find an existing technology that I'm interested in and figure out how to take that technology and adapt it to a particular market need. Like if there's a particular culture that likes that, for example, likes their animal-based product in a certain way, in a certain form, likes to cook it in a certain way, likes to process it in a certain way. How do you take that technology and figure out how to build a product that is suitable for that market and for the way that that market likes to process their meat?
So we can go even simpler than that. So the bioreactors that exist today, the animal cell bioreactors, are really not suited to their purpose, right? They're basically the bioreactors for cell-based meats are really made for biologicals, right? Like therapeutic drugs. And so many companies are repurposing this technology, but like the bioreactor tech is terrible because it's super expensive, and it's not thinking how to use materials efficiently, right? It's thinking about, hey, we're going to make vials of biological drugs that we can sell for $100,000 a unit. We don't care about cost. Right. So it'll cost them a couple $1 million to get the bioreactor set up and running, and that's fine. But you can't do that with cell-based meats or products from both animal cells and also fungal products and bacterial products, which, by the way, both are incredibly interesting.
So I think the issue there might be that if you're, I mean, the technology that's being used with these bioreactors, I'm assuming has to comply with GMP standards. So I think perhaps you could provide a little bit of insight on this, but how do you think you could adapt something that's built to meet GMP standards, but also make it much cheaper to the point where you could produce food for people as opposed to drugs that are $100,000 a vial?
Well, how do you make something food grade rather than GMP grade, right? I mean, it's the same question, right? Like that, like otherwise, like a donut would cost like $1,000, $10,000, right? Like it's like we know that we can make technologies that are scalable, and good manufacturing practice is exactly that, right? It's a set of standards in which you use to produce things. And so the standards for biologics are very high. The standards for food are lower than biologics. So I think that actually there's plenty of space, and I apologize. Regulatory and SOP and regulations is not my strong point.
No worries.
So I'm not familiar with all of the GMP requirements, but I do know, and the different levels. But I do know that they are different, and they are significantly different. It makes a difference in the price point of the product that's produced.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah. Look into it. Like, ask someone. Like, I would go to like BioMilk and just ask them. Go, hey, do you want me to build you a better bioreactor? And I bet you they're going to say, yeah, we do.
All right, yeah, definitely. I'll definitely talk to them. Do you have any other companies in mind who might be looking to, I guess?
Yeah. Talk to Gelitech. Talk to Stephanie. I'll introduce you to Gelitech. Like, pretty much any cell-based meat company is going to have an interest because the technologies are from the biomedical space, not from the food space.
All right, wonderful. I'll definitely look into those. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a quick question from Prem, who asked, how many companies will SFB invest in 1 quarter?
Yeah, I can take that. So we currently have made 6 investments in this quarter, and we're looking to make another 5 to 10. So at least 10 for sure. And then Sustainable Food Ventures is an interesting experiment because it's on an angel list platform and it's a rolling fund. So it's a very new investment methodology. So usually there's traditional funds and you fundraise for them and you kind of do it behind closed doors. But what is interesting about rolling fund is as we deploy capital to companies, we can fundraise for the fund at the same time. So it's really an interesting way to see where the early stage, and even further stage investment goes when more and more operators come to this space. The only catch with AngelList is that you can raise up to $10 million, and that's not really an AngelList cap. It's actually Ryan, what is the regulations that won't allow you publicly raise more than 10 million?
Yeah. So it's the SEC, due to the Jobs Act that was passed, AngelList created an innovation based on the regulation. I forgot, it's like 505BC or something like that. It's basically it's part of the Jobs Act, which was passed, which allowed the rolling fund to be created by AngelList, which allows a fund to publicly raise up to $10 million. So in the past, when you raise a venture capital fund, so I'm still a partner at a $28 million venture capital fund called Babel Ventures. And so Barbara Manuzzi, my partner in Babel, when we raised that fund, she wasn't able to publicly speak about it, nor was I, until the fund was basically raised. So that's very different to sustainable food ventures. So, we might be able to invest in more companies if we raise more money. And so, the more excitement people have around the companies that we invest in, the more we can potentially invest in. So it is an experiment. Like this is, it is an experiment. It's an experiment for AngelList. It's an experiment for the US because of the Jobs Act.
Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, we can nerd out all day long on like venture capital, all that sort of stuff. I have many philosophies on VC as well.
Well, we only have about a minute left, so I think we're going to close up the Q&A. But thank you all so much for coming tonight. If you guys are looking for any more resources about alt protein, like podcasts or alt protein newsletters and news outlets, please check out the Chapel Hill Alt Protein Project's website, which I'm about to drop in the chat box. We have a lot of resources on there. And then also, if you guys are not on our email list yet and want to stay updated about events, please join the email list from that website. And I'm also dropping our LinkedIn, which will also update y'all on any other future events. And
Sophia, I just wanted to add, if anyone wants some help, if they're putting together like a business idea or something, they just want some advice and some help, Marillis can take the lead, and that, she can help with some of the formative stuff. And I'm happy to help. Anyone that's thinking about building something, particularly around this space, like this target space, if you want to build a biotech company, I'll talk with you, but like it has to be very specific, like type of biotech company. I won't do biomedical devices or diagnostics ever. Just bad experiences with both those spaces.
Yeah, and the way you can reach us is either through like applying or sending us a message through the website, sustainablefoodventures.com, or either of our first names and at sustainablefoodventures.com. I do recommend reaching out to me because I'm every day looking at the emails. Ryan is still guiding the rocket ship Wild Earth, and he has much less bandwidth, and I usually take him the information.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then I'll just say briefly, I'll throw in our Net Impact Instagram handle if you guys want to follow that. We will post our events, and we also do have a food conference coming up in February called MBA FoodCon, and we are still starting to kind of build out the panels for that. Megan Reimage, who asked the first question, is in charge of that, and we're really excited. So if you're interested in food, definitely check out that website and keep an eye out for notifications, and we'll definitely be sure that Chapel Hill Alt Protein knows about that as well.
And Sarah, let us know if you need any contacts. We're happy to connect you with anyone you know.
That would be awesome.
People for the panels and speakers.
Perfect. We already had that potentially in our back pocket that we were going to throw out there.
That sounds good.
Thanks. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your night. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us too over email if you have any questions.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.